Perfect. Now I'm recording it. So I love this chart that we're going to talk about tonight because we are in the final week, and it just so happened, well, it didn't so happen. I kind of planned it out a little bit, but it's working out really well that we get to cover these final week prophecies and the events of the final week of Christ's life this week, the final week. This is it, right? To Resurrection Sunday, and this would be the final week. So it's Wednesday night, tonight, and of course, tradition says that tomorrow will be the Last Supper, and then the crucifixion will be on Good Friday, and then the resurrection on Sunday. But if you're like me, I remember sitting in church way back when I was even in junior high, thinking, well, wait a minute, it says that Jesus will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, 3 days and 3 nights. And if I go from Friday to Saturday to Sunday, I count up, well, that's Friday night and Saturday night. That's only 2 nights. I can see where you can get 3 days, but I can't see where you get 3 nights. And the prophecy, which we'll end up looking at tonight, says 3 days and 3 nights. It's very specific. So we're going to talk about that tonight. It's one of my favorite topics. Over the years, it's been fascinating to watch people respond. You know, people have come up to me and said, you know, this has bothered me for 30 years. Thank you. This is awesome. This makes so much sense. And when we walk through it, you're going to see that actually a Thursday crucifixion makes a lot more sense biblically than a Friday crucifixion. We'll talk a little bit about tradition. We'll talk a little bit about how we think probably the tradition started and what passages are kind of the key passages of why I think Friday started. And we'll also talk a little bit about, you know, tradition dies pretty hard, right? So, and we'll talk at the end a little bit about how important is it? Should we all go storming into Troy's office, you know, tomorrow and demand that we celebrate Good Thursday service instead of Good Friday service? Or do we, I did this on Sunday. I do it every year this week, and I just love it. But we have some other things to get to as well. So I think everybody who did not receive the big packet of first coming prophecies, the 86 direct first coming prophecies, that's up here, and then also the Christ fulfillment of the 7 festivals, which we talked about briefly yesterday. And so we're going to review a little bit, and we're going to look at some of the final week prophecies, and then we're going to look at the events of the final week in this chart that I'll pass out here in a little bit. Here, take these also. There you go. All right, admin, any other admin comments, questions? How did it get so cold again? It was 71 degrees, I think, on Monday. Was it Monday that it was 71 degrees? And I woke up this morning, it was 23 degrees. Crazy. Maybe we all should have gone on spring break down to someplace warm. So I did go down to Florida for about 5 days, and we went to this grocery store that has signs out on the front of their doors. So they have a grocery store, they have like kiosks where you can eat, live music, you know, a bar, you know, all kinds of stuff. And they specifically have big signs up, no masks required. Enter, you know, by entering this, you're affirming that you are not sick, you're healthy, and that stuff, and we don't require masks. And the place was packed. And it's like, that America that you've all been missing, I found it down in Naples in a grocery store that doesn't require any masks. It was awesome. So unlike here, where we just met Mike and his family, and my family met with a couple people from Grace. It was Laura Thompson's birthday, and we sat down at Wildfire, and we had a couple people too many. And the waiter said, we can't do this. You're going to have to leave. And said, well, we're not having dinner. We're going to leave in just a minute. We're just there before class, right? And it's like, all right, guys, I just bought us about 4 minutes because the manager's going to be here in about 4 minutes. You know, what do you want to talk about? And about 4 minutes later, the manager goes, you guys, we can't do this. This is against the law. I kind of whispered under my voice, what law? Can anybody show me a law that says you can't have 8 people at a table in a restaurant? So we got up and left. So, you know, I was at Dunn Brothers in Excelsior, and I've been going there for all during COVID, right? Were you there yesterday? Well, they have some new policy. I mean, it's getting more restrictive. We should be opening up, and it's getting more restrictive. And I sat down with my cup of coffee. I was going to meet somebody, and the owner guy who I've talked to a bunch, I don't remember his name, but do you remember his name? And he says, you got to put your mask on. I said, I'm sitting down drinking my coffee. And he goes, you got to put your mask on. Well, how am I going to do that? And he goes, you got to take it down in between sips. And I looked at it and I said, you're kidding. I said, when did this start? He goes, it's a policy, you know, we're enforcing it. You have to do it. And I said, well, then thank you very much. And I walked out, and I'm not going back. I'm not going back. So that's just me, because that's the Christian thing to do, right? No, I don't know if it's the Christian thing.
Supreme Court ruled in Wisconsin on the mask mandate for the whole state, based on the fact that the governor only had emergency powers for 60 days, no longer in effect. They stripped all the powers and the mask mandate.
Well, did the legislature vote to end the emergency powers of the governor in Wisconsin?
The Supreme Court ended it.
The Supreme Court ended it, because in Minnesota, in the localities, you know, this is unprecedented that any governor in any state anywhere has had emergency powers for over a year. And my understanding is the only body that can end that is the legislature. And of course, one of the houses is controlled by the Democrats, and they're not going to do that. So you guys have not lived under a representative republic in this state of Minnesota for over a year. And nobody seems that concerned about that. I'm concerned about it, but the legislature is not ending it. I don't know, you write your legislators. Pray for them. Pray, pray, pray. How many of you have prayed more for your country in the last year and for your state than you probably have your whole life? I mean, it's man, oh man, oh man. All right, let's pray. Let's do that. Let's pray, and we'll get going, because this will be a fun one here tonight. Lord, you say righteousness exalts a nation. We just pray that across this land, you rise up people who have wisdom, your wisdom, who know truth, your truth, because you are the truth, who understand these biblical principles. I think back long ago to a history book I was reading, and legislators across this country used to say, sir, show me where it was written in the Bible to justify a law that would be debated and voted upon. I can't imagine a legislature doing that today. Show me the biblical validation for the law that you want to pass. Oh my goodness, the heights from which we have fallen, Lord, and yet you are still so important to so many people in this land. And you promised that you would build your church, and the gates of Hades would not prevail against it. So around the world, Lord, we know that so many people are still coming to faith in Christ. And we know that your kingdom will expand. And one day thy kingdom will come on earth as it is in heaven. Lord, we desire righteousness in our government, like righteousness in our leaders, but every single government in man's history has been flawed, and only when you return as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords will righteousness reign on earth. So Lord, we pray for that day, and may you come soon. Maranatha, Lord Jesus, come. Now I just ask for your Spirit to lead us tonight, teach us tonight, help the truths that were discussed and taught here be consistent with your word and with your truth, and may it all point to you, Lord Jesus. We pray in your name. Amen. All right, little review as we always do. So last week we were talking about the different types of prophecies. We talked about direct Old Testament prophecies. That's your list that we handed out. We talked a little bit about the Jewish feasts and festivals and how they point to both the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. That was this sheet that I passed out. And we spent a little time on that. I spent more time on that in the end times class, actually, but We talked about prophetic types of people like Joseph, and his life and his history and some of his actions point to, or prophetic type pointing to the Christ, and events and even inanimate objects. So we talked about one direct prophecy, for example, was being born in Bethlehem. And sure enough, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. That's the handout sheet of the feasts and festivals. So even the 7 feasts that God ordained for Israel in the law point to the person of Christ. I love that. We talked a little bit about Joseph's life, about events such as Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and that God provided the sacrifice for him. And powerful story. I don't, to this day, I don't know that I fully understand that story. I get that God gave up his son, but for God to ask Abraham to give up his son, has that story ever just kind of, man, it just goes right to you, doesn't it? And yet God did provide. And I love that verse in Hebrews where it says Abraham reckoned that God could raise him from the dead. And sure enough, he did get him basically back from death to life. And then in inanimate objects, and we talked about the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And that's where the high priest, once a year would go and sprinkle blood on the Day of Atonement. And when Mary, and that ark had 2 cherubim and on one on each end. And when Mary walked into that tomb on Resurrection Sunday, the scripture specifically says she saw an angel at the head and an angel at the foot. You know what I think she was seeing? The mercy seat, right? I just think that's so cool. That she kind of saw that's where the sacrifice was, right? So even in inanimate objects, and even in the stuff in the ark, points to Jesus. And so we talked about the power of prophecy and specifically fulfilled prophecy, but Jesus' talk to the 2 men on the road to Emmaus is just a powerful moment where he says at the end that all the scriptures, he's explained all the scriptures concerning himself. And it's always, that's just one passage where it's like, I want to read what Jesus said. I want to read how Jesus applied all of the Old Testament to himself. But you know what? We have the rest of the New Testament. So if you look at your list, by the way, let me just grab this list. I have a copy up here. If you look at this list, you will often see the book of Matthew as under the New Testament fulfillment portion. And Matthew will often be one of the proof passages from the New Testament for the fulfillment, because it will say things like, let's see if I can find one quick. Now watch, I won't be able to find one. Yeah, so number 39, come at a specific time. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to your daughters of Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey. Matthew over and over and over again will say, this happened to fulfill the Old Testament prophecy. So I can imagine, take all those verses in Matthew, and that's probably what Jesus talked about to the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, right? I'm the one David talked about. I'm the one Isaiah talked about, that he would be pierced for our transgressions. I'm the one that the psalmist talked about, that said all his bones could be counted, and on and on and on. Can't you just hear him explaining these things to the 2 men on the road to Emmaus? And then I talked about Paul saying that he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. Paul was probably really good at this also. Probably really good at applying the Old Testament to the New Testament events and saying, see, it had to happen this way, right? Do you remember the Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch? Remember that story? And the Ethiopian eunuch is reading from Isaiah. We just did this in our study. Mike, you're going to have to help me out here. He was reading in Isaiah, and he says, was he writing about himself or someone else? And Philip says, someone else. It's the Messiah. And he explained to him the gospel. And the guy says, well, okay, I believe. What's going to keep me from being baptized? And they get baptized. And then suddenly, what happens to Philip? He disappears. Because that's typically what happens when you share the gospel with somebody, right? What's that one all about? It's the only place in scripture where someone shares the gospel and then poof, they're gone. And it's like, well, okay, it never happens again. I just don't get it. So, do you have a list? Do you have your list of questions ready when we get to heaven and we go to that answer booth? And then we started walking through some of the prophecies, starting with, of course, in Genesis chapter 3, and I read the Del Tackett story, the Christmas seed, that the first prophecy for the Christ is in the fall. So right as mankind falls, God gives us the first prophecy for the seed that is going to come and destroy Satan, right? Now, we didn't have much detail at the time. We didn't know much about him. It was veiled in a way that only with the rest of the New Testament can we really understand what it meant. And but it sure enough, that's the first prophecy for Christ. And that was that Christmas seed story that I went. And then a powerful lineage of the Christ. So God makes a promise to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, that he would be from Judah, from a descendant of David, that he would come as a child born of a virgin. And so we looked at the genealogies of Christ. And sure enough, why are those genealogies are there? To prove that Jesus fulfills the requirements of the lineage of the coming Messiah. That's the primary reason why those genealogies are there. And then we looked at some more detailed prophecies. So pull out your list. So we looked at number 9, that born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin. And by the way, the whole born of the virgin thing, this was where I make a very definitive statement. If there was no literal creation, if there was no literal Garden of Eden, if there was no literal Adam and no literal tree and no literal, that by the way should say the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by the way. That's the one that he ate, right? They could eat from the tree of life. It was the other tree. Cross that out. Okay, I got to change that. And a literal command not to eat of it, and then a literal fall. Remember what I said? There would be no need for a literal redeemer to come and redeem mankind from their sin. And so they have to be literal events. Adam has to be a literal person. I also showed you a slide. I think I took it out. Yeah, I took it out of half a dozen or so places where Adam is referred to in the New Testament. Never as some myth or mythical figure or parable or whatever, but always as a literal person. And so Adam was a literal person. And so the concept that Jesus is the second Adam, he's the only other person that's ever walked the face of the earth who's not the product of reproduction, but was the result of a direct creative act of God. So Adam was made by God, a son of God. Jesus, in his incarnation, in his earthly body, was made by God, not the product of reproduction. And so it was without that original sin, just like Adam. That's why he's called the second man or the second Adam, right? All the rest of us are the product of reproduction. So we've inherited Adam's sinful nature. Jesus didn't. That's the significance of the virgin birth, right? And then from 2 weeks ago, we talked about that Mary was actually a surrogate mother, right? I don't think God actually used the egg. I think he just formed the body in the womb of the virgin, and she was a surrogate mother. So, all right. And then we looked at several prophecies from the slaughter of children accompanying the coming of the Messiah, that kings would bring gifts, they'd go down to Egypt. I'm not going to go through all of these. He would come to his temple. He'd be preceded by one, John the Baptist. He'd be ministering in Galilee, speak in parables. I can't remember if I told you this. So for the first time of 2 years ago, I think it was, I did my first class on parables, all the parables. And it was a fascinating study. I've always just kind of ignored the parables, or a lot of them, because they're hard. So when something's hard, you just ignore it, right? So, but that was a fascinating. I got to do that class again sometime.
So parables are hard, so I can kind of speak in them.
We actually go through that in lesson number 1, right? Because if you don't want to understand, you won't. But if you do, you can, is basically the answer. So, and one of our problems with most of the parables and our problem interpreting them is we try to apply these parables to the church too often when most of them really are about Israel, right? Remember, Jesus came as a Jew to those under the law. He was under the law. He spoke to those under it. He came to his own, right? He was made like his brothers, meaning Israel and mankind, obviously, but he was a Jew and taught under the law to those under the law. And we have to understand the parables in that light. It's not that the church is invisible, but you have to, this is true with all the gospels, by the way. You really have to understand that the church doesn't exist yet. Now you see it. He talks about it. I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it, for example. But he's really speaking to Israel. And I think that's one of the keys to understanding the parables as well. Despise, he claimed to be God. Yes, he did. And come as a specific time. So that's the Daniel 9 prophecy. And I tell you, I'd love to spend this whole hour walking through that 70-week prophecy from Daniel 9. It's an amazing prophecy that it says, from the issuing of the decree to restore, rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, comes, there will be a very specific amount of time. And sure enough, you analyze that prophecy and you lay it out appropriately. And from the start in Nehemiah chapter 2, where this prophecy, where this decree is to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, given to Nehemiah, which was 445 BC, until the Messiah comes and you understand it properly, to the very day on Palm Sunday that prophecy points to. Did Jesus come did the anointed one come at the appropriate time? To the very day he came. And it's such a powerful, powerful prophecy that God gave Israel and the world the timing of the Messiah's coming. And some of you asked me for that email of this chart that explains all that. So, all right. Questions? Comments? Before we get to the final week stuff. Cool. You guys are easy. Yeah, and if you have any questions online, yeah, jeff@verdoren.com. Thank you, Troy. Everybody mute, please. Yeah, I was hearing someone in my ear, but it's good now, so thank you. All right. Oh, let me do one thing. I was going to check my email to see if anybody out here. Okay, give me 30 seconds as I reply to this. Couple people were working for the chart for tonight who are on Zoom. And so let me just grab that real quick. So, smoke them if you got them. Christ, final week, copy. All right, I'm just gonna reply to these really quick with an attachment and send it out. All right. I think that's it. All right. So turn to prophecy number, I should have put the number, 40, number 40. We're on the big list, prophecy number 40. And once again, this is not, we're just going to cover these very quickly. So if you have any questions about one of them or specific, this is, the idea is to give you the fullness of the concept that God has been telling the world about this Messiah in a lot of different ways. And he fulfills it. One guy actually, I should put this slide in here. One guy actually did a calculation of what are the odds of one man fulfilling just 6, maybe someone with a smartphone can find this and tell me what the actual number was. One man fulfilling just 6 of these prophecies, and our list has 84, 86 of them or something. But what's the probability that one man in history would fulfill 6 of them? And I don't remember the 6 that he chose, but it was like 1 times 10 to the 20th power to 1. It's astronomical. And when you add all of them together, I would argue this Daniel 9 prophecy, he had to come on Palm Sunday, 32 AD as the Messiah. Was there anybody else walking around Jerusalem in early April 32 AD claiming to be God, the Messiah? Not that I know of, right? So it boils it down to one person in the world. Yes, ma'am. I actually have a list from a website from years and years ago about the history of people who have claimed to be the Messiah, right? After the Messiah came, there have been many. I don't know in and around the time of Jesus claiming to be the Messiah or claiming to be God. So I don't know. I've never read or heard anything about that. There's nothing in the Bible that someone else claimed to be. Now, after, who's the Moonies, the Sun Young Moon guy? He claims to be the returned Messiah. And it's like, wait a minute here. I've read Matthew 24, and it says that when the sun comes on the clouds with power and great glory, he establishes his kingdom. As far as I know, he did not establish any kingdom and is ruling from Jerusalem. So I don't think he's the Messiah. All right. He comes on a donkey. Zechariah 9 says, "O daughter of Zion, daughter of Jerusalem, see your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey." That was a prophecy, and sure enough. Now, if you knew that prophecy, is that one that you could have fulfilled because you knew it was a prophecy? And if you were a shyster who wanted to fool everybody, could you just say, "Hey, I need to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey, so go get one"? Sure. How many of those could you force fulfill out of the 84? I don't know. I haven't figured out how many you could do, but a lot of them you couldn't. Can you determine where you're born? Can you determine the method of your death? See what I'm saying? Can you determine your lineage? Yes. Right. Yeah. And there's no crowd saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, right? So, yeah, I mean, everybody in Jerusalem knew this guy was there. That's clear from the conversation of the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, right? They said, "Well, where have you been?" Everybody knew what was going on with this guy named Jesus, right? So, yeah, you're right. Good point. Very good point. He comes in the name of the Lord. He was hated without cause, number 42. He's rejected by his own people. There's a lot of verses about Israel rejecting him. The stone the builders rejected has become their capstone, and so on. So, yeah, Israel did reject their Messiah. Be plotted against by Jew and Gentile alike. This is the whole question of who killed Jesus. Do you guys remember the Passion of the Christ? What's his name? Mel Gibson left the scene in the thing and before it was released, it was very controversial. And what was controversial? They said, "Let his blood be on our hands," the Jews said. Remember that from scripture? And they said he got lots and lots of complaints, basically saying, "You have to take that out. That line has been used to persecute the Jews for a long, long time," right? And so there's this idea that some have that the Jews killed Jesus. Did the Jews kill Jesus? Yeah, well, that's the answer. You're already there. Okay, so the next part of the story is, but they didn't kill him. They actually brought him to Rome, and Rome crucified him. So Rome killed him, right? Well, no, the true answer is, right. I feel for Pilate. A lot of people condemn him in history. He did everything he can to try to Yeah, I find no, this is an innocent man. I find no guilt in this man. And yeah, I'll release someone else. Or I release Jesus. No, give us Barabbas. And so, but in the end, he did crucify him or order him crucified. But really, it's all of us, right? It's our sin that sent Jesus to the cross. So it's everybody's sin. That's why he died. So it doesn't matter that the Jews said, let his blood be on our hand, because they didn't, as a people group, kill him, nor the Romans, but all of us, all mankind, really are responsible for Jesus going to the cross. He was betrayed by a friend. Of course, we know that. Judas betrayed him. And he says, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And that was Judas. And as we'll see, what did Jesus tell Judas to do as he left? Do you remember? What did he say to go do? Yeah, do quickly. But he also instructed him to go buy what was needed for the feast, right? Yeah. So does that mean they were eating the feast that night at the Last Supper, or was it yet future? That's one of the clues we're going to look at. You see what I'm saying? If he said to go buy the stuff for the feast, that means they weren't eating the feast yet, because he told Judas to go and get what was needed for the feast. For 30 pieces of silver, which was used to buy a potter's field, which is actually also prophesied back in Zechariah 11. He'd be accused by false witnesses. He'd be silent before his accusers, struck on the cheek, be spat upon, be beaten, be disfigured. There's so many surrounding the actual crucifixion. And once he died, the sheep would be scattered, which they were, right? They fled in fear. No, I'm not one of his followers. 3 times he denied them, and they all hid. They were hiding in the locked room. A couple days later, he'd be cut off prior to 70 AD. This goes back to the Daniel 9 prophecy that says that the timing of the Christ's coming was in 32 AD, but it also indicates that it had to happen. In other words, the Messiah had to happen before 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem. So according to the Old Testament biblical prophecy, the Messiah had to come before the temple was destroyed, which we now know historically was in 70 AD. You see that? Very important prophecy. And he was executed by crucifixion. Look at all these. Oh, this is not it yet. Psalm 22 is very important next. On a tree numbered with transgressors was he crucified with other criminals. Not other criminals, with criminals, I should say. And he interceded for them. His clothing was cast lots for. He was thirsty. He would be offered wine vinegar for his thirst. You know all these, right? This is all part of the story. We've grown up with this story, and all of this was prophesied. All of these are an Old Testament prophecy. He'd be mocked and hurled insults at. They'd shake their heads at him. Let the Lord rescue him. Remember that? So notice these are all Psalm 22 here. Psalm 22 is a very powerful messianic prophecy about his death and burial, his crucifixion. There'd be darkness. He'd be forsaken by God. That's how Psalm 22 starts. My God, why have you forsaken me? I think that's why he says that line, is to bring the listener, bring the Jew back to Psalm 22. And all of these other things in Psalm 22 are going to apply to his crucifixions. No bones broken. Why were Jesus's bones not broken? He was dead already. Yeah. And why do you suppose he was dead already?
They were told, God told the Israelites that when they killed the lamb, that they were not to break any bones.
That was actually one of the instructions. So you couldn't have the Lamb of God have any broken bones, right? So none were broken. Even in the piercing, right? He was pierced for our transgressions. Now, you guys have probably heard this over the years, that he wasn't actually pierced in the hands. In the first century, the wrist was part of the hand. So I think the language there gives this little image, but it makes sense. that if you put a spike through here, that's going to lock you in on the Christ. If you put a spike in here, your flesh would rip away and you'd tear right away from that stake. But if you put it in the wrist, in between the tibia and the fibula, and anatomy people, any anatomy, is that right? Are you in medical, or no? You just know. All right. I need my daughter here. She's big on anatomy. But now you're locked in. Your bones are locked in. There's no way that you're going to rip out of that. And over here as well. Yes, ma'am. Oh, so I was completely wrong. What's the tibia and the fibula? Well, that's the leg. Yeah, I knew that. I hope my Sarah's not watching. She does a lot of anatomy in her pre-physical therapy training. She'd be embarrassed for me. Even in the legs, it wasn't in the foot, it was in the ankle. And in fact, some people believe that the spikes actually came in from the side. So the ankles would be positioned on the side of that upright beam that he was crucified on, and that the stakes would go into the side, locking once again. Because if it was in anywhere in the hand or the foot, I mean, we're talking about this, and it's hard to even imagine, right? That if you put it in here, you would just rip right out. So nobody fell down off the cross. These guys were good, right? Because they went right in between the what are the leg bones? The radius and the, okay. And then what's this down here in between these two bones? The tibia and the fibula. I'm right 50% of the time then, right? So, yeah, they would stick it right through those bones. And they knew what they were doing. So executed, no bones broken. And that's a good point. In the prophecy class that I do on it, it's like, yeah, that was one of the requirements of the sacrificial lamb for the Passover, that none of the bones would be broken. His side would be pierced. Oh, but why was he dead already? They had to break the other two criminals' legs, right, to speed up the death process. Why do you suppose Jesus was already dead? What happened before his crucifixion? He was. My understanding is, and I've heard this taught a number of times, you never gave the 39 lashes, scourged somebody, and crucified somebody. And it happened because Pilate was trying to appease the Jews by having him beaten first, and maybe that would be enough, and then they would let him go, but at least he'd live. But no, they didn't accept that. So he had already been beaten. So in his weakened condition, he then goes to the cross. Yeah, I think I've heard that was against the law to do both of those to a man. And, in their compassion, Say that again. Yeah. So and before sundown, right? And that's why they were trying to rush to kill them before sundown, before the Sabbath, which we're going to talk about in a minute as well. Buried on the same day. His death atones for sin. I think that's where we're going to go next week. Is, well, what about the atonement? Do we understand what happens on the cross? Do we understand what it means to sacrifice for the sins of the world? What does that exactly mean? And what does that mean for mankind? So I think that's where we're going to go next week. And be the lamb that is slaughtered, buried with the rich. Oh man, there's so many things. I would love to go through and analyze now the difference between the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All of you guys know the most holy site in all of Christianity is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Israel, where supposedly the crucifixion and the burial happens, right? Well, do you know that spot literally meets none of the biblical criteria for the location of Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection? And yet, whether you're Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant, that is the most holy site supposedly in all of Christianity. And if you go in there, they supposedly have the stone that Jesus was laid on, and you'll see all the women with their wet cloths and their water, and they're kissing the stone, and they're, on and on and on. And they have candles that you can pay $5, get a candle and put it up on the hill part where he was crucified. And then the priest blows them out and brings them back and puts them at the front door again to just recycle them all over again. And then you have the Holy Sepulchre. I wasn't planning on doing that. I shouldn't. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna do it. The Holy Sepulchre. Jesus was buried in a tomb made of rock, hewn out of solid rock, right? Well, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, do they have a cave hewn out of solid rock? No, they have a giant wood box inside the church, and you have to, it's made completely out of wood, and they have a door, and you go in, and it's all adorned with robes and tapestries and candles and incense and the typical kind of cave stuff. And that's where Jesus supposedly was laid. And millions of people every year stand in line for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to get inside the Holy Sepulchre and to see the place. Oh, that's next. Very good. All right. You compare the biblical criteria of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to a place called the Garden Tomb. And the Garden Tomb is outside the gate, outside the wall, outside the city. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is inside. It's by a gate, the Damascus gate on the north side of Jerusalem. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not. By a road where people were passing by. 2 major roads pass by this very spot. In a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. And as you stand there in the Garden Tomb and you look up along that cliff, what do you see, Tricia? A skull. You literally see the face of a skull. It's as plain as day, and you can look it up on the internet. I should have. It is. It's a place of the skull, and there's actually a skull there. And on this rock flat place in front of the place of the skull, there are actually chiseled out holes in the rock. Now, why do you suppose there would be holes chiseled out in the rock? So the cross would fit in there and hold up the cross. And then in the place that he was crucified, there was a garden. Right next door, there is evidence of a 1st century garden with a giant cistern and evidence of cultivated areas and a garden. And in that garden, scripture says there is a tomb, there was a tomb hewn out of solid rock. You know what's in the garden in the rock face? Right next to the place of the skull? A tomb hewn out of solid rock. And if you walk into that tomb, and I've been in there 3 times now, there's a channel in front of the tomb where a giant stone would be rolled to cover up the tomb, right? Now, the circular rock is no longer there, but there's evidence that it was there at one time, and the channel is there. And by the way, you go in, and these are large gathering room. It's about 10 feet by 8 feet or so, and large enough to fit a number of people, just like scripture says. And it even says when Mary went in to duct, so the door is low, so they had to duct to go in. And it even says they looked to the right. And guess what? The chambers where the bodies would have been laid were to the right. There's about 15 biblical descriptions that this place called the Garden Tomb, which gets probably 2% of the visitors of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre gets, right? But to me, fits all of the biblical criteria. Oh, and one more that they won't even tell you at the place, and I've asked them why they don't get into this at all. After Jesus was buried in the roads, what did the Romans order? What was their order concerning the tomb? It'd be sealed. Do you know how a tomb was sealed? There's actually evidence in other tombs that the way they sealed it was they'd chisel out a hole, they would put in an iron bar, and then they'd put in molten lead around that bar, so that steel bar would be in the stone, so the stone couldn't roll. That bar would stop it, and then they'd put a government seal, probably of some sort or other, that you weren't supposed to break. You know what's in the wall? Right about where that stone would have been, right here? Lead. Remnants of a lead hole where there's molten lead inside there, where the tomb was probably sealed. It meets so many of the descriptions. And how many of you have been there? it's just an incredibly special place. Huh? It is amazing. And if you haven't been there and you're not planning on going there, look up the Garden Tomb on the internet. And you know, one of the best things about it was it's actually managed by the British. They found it, I don't know, 80, 90 years ago or something. And at the end of every tour, they say, by the way, do we know 100% sure that this is the place that Jesus was laid? And they say, no, we really don't. And in contrast with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where you've got lines of women waiting to rub the stone and touch the water on their, I mean, it's just, they go under the altars and they kiss the rocks and they'll say this. And by the way, regardless of if it was here or not, we don't worship a place. We don't worship a rock. He's not here. He has risen just as he said. Amen. Quite a contrast between the Garden Tomb and the Holy Sepulchre, which, by the way, was declared to be the spot by Constantine's mother, right? Which was kind of the start of the whole Catholic Church stuff and everything. So that just might, anyway. Shoot. Raised on the third day, ascended to the Father, and so on. Okay. I am going to pause on these. Where's my camera? Huh? That's him. So 1 times 10 to the 28th power. I mean, that's basically impossible when you know the size of that number. That was 8. What? Well, 17th or 28th? What does yours say? Wow. So it's a big number, and that's just 8 out of 84. How many? I always forget how many I have on my list. I should remember that. 84. I have 4 on my list. Okay, we're going to come back to his burial and resurrection stuff because we're going to get to this. All right. Because I need all this time. Mike, will you help me? Pass that out.
I got 400.
Yeah, there is 400.
I know there's a lot of people who say there's 300 Old Testament prophecies. He's got 20 or more. Remember what I said about my list of 84? I wanted only unique, direct prophecies. So remember, there's lots of indirect prophecies and a lot of prophecies in type. I just wanted direct prophecies on my list of direct prophecies. That's why mine has 84. Christ's final week. What I'm going to do is talk about the Old Testament pattern and then the New Testament fulfillment, basically. And the Old Testament is kind of on top of the bar. The New Testament is kind of below the bar. If you notice, the bar both has the Hebrew dates and the Julian dates. And that's important because remember, when does a Hebrew day start? Sundown. When does our day start? Well, not morning, but at midnight. Our day starts at midnight. The shaded lines are night and day, night and day, night and day. So you can see the nights and the days, the Hebrew day and the Julian day. We're actually not on the Julian calendar anymore, but trust me, it's a lot easier when you're working with ancient dates to work with the Julian dates. Anyway, So these are actually a few days off the Gregorian dates, our calendar today, but it still applies. It's the same thing. So why does tradition say Friday? Well, let's turn to John chapter 19 and 31. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John 19:31. And I think this passage, probably more than anything, is why Friday is considered the traditional crucifixion day. And it says this, 19:31. Now it was the day of preparation. Remember that day of preparation day. We're going to make a big deal about the day of preparation. And the next day was to be a special Sabbath, because the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. So clearly the Sabbath is coming and they wanted the bodies down off the cross. When does the Sabbath start every week? Sundown on Friday. So the crucifixion must be on Friday. But notice it didn't just say Sabbath, it said a special Sabbath. Oh. What's a special Sabbath? Well, let's find out. I think that's the misunderstanding that tradition has set, that they said, oh, the Sabbath starts sundown Friday, crucifixion must have been on Friday, right? But we have a special Sabbath that we need to account for, so let's do that. All right, start in the upper left, over on the left, you see lamb selected on the 10th day of the month. And we're going to go to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. And at the Passover, you guys remember the original story, right? The plagues came on Egypt. This is the last one. The death angel is about to come, and God instructs Israel to slaughter the lamb, take the blood, put it above your doorpost, so that the death angel doesn't kill your firstborn like it was going to Egypt, right? So this is the instruction. Tell the whole community, I'm in verse 3, Exodus 12:3, that on the 10th day of this month, okay, what month? It's the month of Nisan, Nisan. That's the first month now of the Hebrew calendar, Nisan. So I'll say that word a number of times, and this is the Hebrew month, basically the first month of their year. And on the 10th day of that month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If it's too big or they don't have enough, there's instructions. The animals you choose, verse 5, must be year-old males without defect, and they may take from the sheep or from the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month. Okay, so they selected the lamb on the 10th. They were to take care of it until the 14th day, when all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. What time is twilight? Late in the afternoon, before sundown. Okay, and then it will go on to say that they are then to eat the lamb in their house. So this would be after sundown, which means when was the Passover meal eaten? On the 14th, on the day they slaughtered the lamb, or after sunset on the next day, the 15th, that evening, they would then eat the lamb, in which they were instructed not to leave their house until morning and make sure all the lamb was consumed. Do you remember that part of it? So that's the Passover. It is reiterated. Did you have a question? You raised your hand.
Yeah, I might have just- Are you saying that they were instructed to kill the lamb on the 14th, but then they ate it? So on the day of the 14th, then they ate it.
Yeah, so look at the chart.
Yeah. I think for the first Passover, though, they did it all in one day. And then they shifted. But that's.
Okay, well, let's read Leviticus. So if you go to Leviticus 23 and verse 5, 23 and verse 5, here is more instructions now that this is going to be a lasting ordinance year after year after year. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight. I'm in verse 5, by the way. So Leviticus 23:5. On the 14th day of the first month, the month of Nisan. So once again, what happens on the 14th? They slaughter the lamb at twilight. So the Passover begins at twilight on the 14th when you slaughter the lamb. On the 15th day of the month, that's when the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. And for 7 days, you must eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. So the 15th of Nisan is a sacred assembly where they are to do no regular work. What is that called? A Sabbath, a special Sabbath. You see that? It's kind of like Christmas. I know you get weekends, you get weekends off every week, but then you get Christmas off too. And you never know what day of the week that special Sabbath is going to be on, right? Because it's going to fall on a different day of the week depending on the year. In 32 AD, guess when that fell? Nisan the 15th, a sacred assembly on Friday. You see that? Starting at Thursday at sundown, going all the way to Friday at sundown. You see that sacred assembly? That's the Sabbath. That's the special Sabbath. And then, of course, Friday sundown started the regular Sabbath. So what does that mean? That means there's 2 Sabbaths in a row, doesn't it? It means that starting Thursday at sundown, there was a special Sabbath for the Passover that year. And then starting Friday sundown, there was the weekly regular Sabbath, 2 Sabbaths in a row. Then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then the rest of it goes on to say in Leviticus, the first day of the week after the regular weekly Sabbath was to be the Feast of First Fruits. Well, who was first fruits? Jesus was. What day did he resurrect? On Sunday, the first day of the week. We'll see that in a minute as well. Okay, so do you see the pattern? Old Testament pattern. Pick the lamb on the 10th of Nisan. Slaughter the lamb on the 14th of Nisan at twilight, late in the afternoon. Then take the lamb, eat the lamb at the Passover meal on the 15th after sundown, which is a special Sabbath, a sacred assembly on the 15th, which is then also the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so that they were supposed to stay in their house all night and make sure there was no lamb left by morning. Yes.
The Passover is different than, the Passover is one night, and then there's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is 7 days, 7 nights. And the night of Passover and the night of the first night of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, both of them are celebrated.
Yeah, so the Passover meal eaten on Nisan the 15th at the very beginning of the day, right? Because day starts at sundown, right? Then they would be in their house overnight, and that whole first day of the 15th would be the start of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and be a Sabbath. So they would stay in their house all night, make sure none of the lamb was left until morning, and then during the daylight hours, that would be a Sabbath, do no regular work. And that would be the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yes, on the 15th. So Nisan the 15th. Okay, so that's the Old Testament pattern. Are we ready to go to the New Testament descriptions? All right. So when I did this chart, it was actually a question in a class, and somebody asked me this question, and I didn't know how to answer them. It's like, well, wait a minute here. Let me go research it. So I started looking at all of the time references in the Gospels pertaining to the last week of Christ's life and see how they fit together. Let's see how they fit together, shall we? All right. John 12. I'm now below the chart, starting over on the left. 6 days before the Passover, it says, Jesus is coming to Jerusalem. Well, that's Saturday. Count off Nisan the 9th, right? So count off 6 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nisan the 15th. When the Passover is eaten. All right, we're good. The next day would be Palm Sunday. All right, so we know that we're locked in on Sunday, Palm Sunday, when Jesus then comes into Jerusalem on a donkey, Mark 11. And he goes to the temple, he clears the temple, Matthew 21. It then gets late, he goes to Bethany, where he spends the night. This is going to actually be his pattern every night now. He's going to come into the city, he's going to then do some teaching and turn over tables, and then he's going to walk out of the old city, down the Kidron Valley, up over the Mount of Olives, and retreat to Bethany, which is just past the Mount of Olives. And then the next morning, he's going to come back in. So the next morning, now Monday, so we know this is Monday. The next day, he curses the fig tree. On reaching Jerusalem, he clears the temple. Oh, wait a minute, clears the temple? He does it again? I think yes. When you look at the descriptions, I actually think he clears it on Sunday and on Monday. Which, when you think about it, makes sense. He clears it on Sunday and then goes away, and they all say, oh, we better not do that again, right? No, they reset up all their tables and they start over. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. So I think he actually clears it. And that's the note in the lower left if you want to study that more. Evening came, he goes out of the city. In the morning, Mark 11, Peter sees the fig tree. They arrive again in Jerusalem. He has parables and teachings in Matthew 22 and 23. And now he's leaving the temple, Matthew 24. And that's when he says, and if you've been through my end times class, we make a big deal about Matthew 24. Remember the question, the statement he says, do you see all these things? Not one stone will be left upon another. Are you kidding me? A huge temple with giant stones and not one stone. How in the world is that ever going to happen? And so what does his disciples ask? They say, Jesus, when will that happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And he then gives the answer. Now, in my end times class, you know that he doesn't actually answer that first question, does he? He doesn't answer when is that temple going to be destroyed. But we know the answer to that, right? When? 70 AD. The rest of the chapter is all about what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And he answers that question. All of these signs for the tribulation and the second coming of Christ and so on and so forth. And then they retreat further back to Bethany, Mark 14. And it says the Passover is 2 days away. All right, so now it's in the evening. We're on the 13th, 2 days. 1, 2, that's the 15th. There we are. We're still in sync. All the time references are still lining up. That's when Judas goes and meets with the chief priest to betray Jesus. And then we get to Wednesday. All right. Now, we don't have much or anything about Wednesday during the day, but that evening we have a very significant event, and that's the Last Supper. Now, it says of the Last Supper, it was on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it's like, well, wait a minute here. We just said that the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts on the 15th, and yet they're calling this the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, we got to go up to our note right above there. Preparation Day is referred to as part of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Matthew 26 and Mark 14. But it's the day before the special Sabbath, when Mark 15 says, on the day when it's customary to sacrifice the lamb. Well, we know that the day that's customary to sacrifice the lamb is Nisan the 14th. So we know that Preparation Day is the day that they're preparing for the Passover. So that is Nisan the 14th. And the Jews would ended up over the years considering that day, Preparation Day, as part of the feast, even though it's technically not part of the feast. It's kind of like when we say, is Christmas Eve part of Christmas? And today we kind of say yes. But remember, in old times, Christmas was Christmas. Christmas Eve was about preparing for Christmas. So for the longest time, nobody had their Christmas tree up starting in Thanksgiving. Nobody. You know when the trees went up? Christmas Eve, Preparation Day. That's when you what do you call it when you dress the tree? Not dress the tree. That's what you do to your turkey. You trim your tree. Thank you. I'm not that old. You trim your tree and you wrap your presents and you get all ready. That's preparation, Christmas Eve. Preparation Day is like Christmas Eve. That's the preparation for the Passover meal. You see that? All right. So the preparation day is Nisan the 14th, on the day that's customary to sacrifice the lamb, which we know is the 14th. Now, was the Last Supper the Passover meal? Now, if you watch Bill O'Reilly's Killing Jesus, the whole movie ended with the Last Supper. And at the end scene, somebody brings out this giant lamb on a platter, right, to serve the lamb. In your remembrance of the Last Supper, was there any lamb at that meal? What is served? Bread and wine. This bread, my body, I break for you. This is the wine, the cup of my blood, the new covenant that's poured out for you. The only items that are ever described in the upper room for the Last Supper are bread and wine, no lamb. By the way, is the lamb at its own meal? Would the lamb be at its own meal? Or is the lamb the sacrifice for the meal? Would Jesus attend the Passover meal if he is the Lamb of God, the sacrifice for the Passover? You see where I'm going with this? In addition, there's 3 primary verses. Let me get through these verses that show us that at the Last Supper, the Passover meal is still future. 3 proof texts that definitively show that the Last Supper is not the Passover meal like many say it is. Here they are. John 13, 1 and 2. Right below that Last Supper in that middle column. Do you see that? It says this: it was before the Passover feast. The evening meal, not the Passover meal, was served. This is Christmas Eve. Scripture clearly says that this is not the Passover meal, that it's yet future, meaning that it hasn't happened yet. Next is John 13, 29. When Judas finally does get up and is going to betray him, and he says, go and do what you do quickly, he is told to go buy what is needed for the feast. Why would Jesus tell him to go buy what is needed for the feast if they're eating the feast right then and there? Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's not the Passover feast. That's not until Nisan the 15th in the evening. You see that? So when Jesus instructs them to go get the room and prepare it for the Passover, that's exactly what they were doing. They show up, they get a room. There's lots of prep that needs to be done to that room. What's one of the things that they have to make sure there's none of in that room for the Passover? Leaven. So you're going to procure the room. You're going to get your stuff for the meal. You're going to make sure there's tables and chairs there. And you're going to spend a whole bunch of time cleaning it out, making sure there's no leaven there in order to eat the Passover the next day. Preparation day. This is the evening of preparation day. Bread, wine. That's all that's there. And that's when Jesus says, this is my body, this is my blood. And then he even says in Luke, I desire to eat this Passover with you, but I'm not going to until the kingdom of heaven comes. Do you remember that? And people use that as a proof text that he's eating the Passover right then and there. No, read that passage again when you get home with this understanding in mind, and you'll see that no, he's saying, I know the Passover is tomorrow night. I desire to eat it with you, but I'm not, because I'm the sacrificial lamb who's going to be sacrificed. And I won't eat the Passover with you again until I come again in the kingdom when he comes. And you know what we celebrate during the 1,000-year reign of Christ? We start celebrating the Passover once again. Do you believe it? That's crazy. That's cool. Yeah, Ezekiel, someplace 37, 38. No. 40, in the 40s. It would be maybe 45, Ezekiel 45. Okay, one more proof text. I'm running out of time, so I'm talking as fast as I possibly can. Are you getting it all, or am I talking too fast? What, you're getting it all? All right, good. They leave the Last Supper, and they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, wait a minute. If this was the Passover, were they supposed to leave their room or their house? No, they weren't. One more little clue that this is not the Passover meal. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where Jesus is arrested. That's where he has his prayer to God. Oh, if there's any other way, Lord, let this cup from me. But in the end, not my will, but your will be done. He's arrested. He's brought before Caiaphas. Peter denies him 3 times. Early the next morning, I'm at the bottom there now on Thursday. We're still preparation day. This is still Nissan the 14th now, preparation day, early the next morning. They've been up all night. It says this, John 18:28. They bring him over to Pilate after being with Caiaphas. And it says the Jews did not enter the palace because they wanted to be clean to be able to eat the Passover. You see that? If the Last Supper was the Passover, why in the world would they not go into a Gentile's house to remain clean in order to eat the Passover? That right there, proof text. You remember one proof text out of this whole thing, have it be that one, right? John 18:28. They didn't go into the Gentile's house, Pilate, because they wanted to be clean to eat the Passover that night. Yeah.
They would also need to keep kosher, or they would also need to not be around that for the whole festival.
For the whole 7 days. Okay. Yeah. But okay, but it says specifically, it doesn't say to be clean to be able to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It says to be able to be clean to what? To eat the Passover. Okay. All right. So Pilate sends Jesus over to Herod. It's John 19. I'm on John 19. It says the day of preparation of Passover week, in the 6th hour, he says, "Here is your king." It says it's the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner. The feast is that night. It's the custom to release a prisoner. Do you want me to release the prisoner for you for Passover? Well, they do, but they get the wrong guy. And they call out, crucify him. And from the 6th to the 9th hour, there's darkness. That's that little shaded bar there, little slightly shaded bar that you see on preparation day, on Nissan the 14th, on Thursday. And then Matthew 27:46 says that Jesus dies at the 9th hour. The 9th hour is around 3 o'clock, late in the afternoon, at twilight. Did you guys understand what's happening in all of Israel at that very moment? On preparation day, according to Leviticus and Exodus, all of Israel who had selected their lamb 4 days before on Palm Sunday, when Jesus was selected as the anointed one, as the blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and watched over it for 4 days, was at that very moment sacrificing their lambs as Jesus, the Lamb of God, is on the cross, dying for the sins of the world. You see that? At the very moment. And then, of course, it's preparation day, and they say that the special Sabbath is approaching, and we need to get the body down. The special Sabbath is approaching, sundown Thursday. They get him down off the cross, they quickly prepare it, they put him in the tomb. But the women go back and need to start preparing spices. But they can't get back to the body until when? After the Sabbath. So the next day? No, that's the regular Sabbath. So they have to wait till Sunday, first light. That's the first chance they have to get to the body, because there's 2 Sabbaths in a row. So watch this. Matthew 28:1. After the Sabbath, on the first day of the week, at dawn at the first day of the week. It even says there was an empty tomb very early in the morning on the first day of the week. And John 20:1 says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed. There's nothing unimportant in scripture. It says before the sun came up, meaning that Jesus was already resurrected out of the tomb before first light on Sunday. Why is that important? 3 days and 3 nights.
Plus it's Sabbath. It's actually the Sabbath. Sunday's not Sabbath. Saturday is the Sabbath. And God declared that it's the
Correct. So the Sabbath is over. So Sunday first light is the first chance they have to go touch a dead body, which they weren't supposed to do on the Sabbath, and do regular work, meaning prepare the body with the spices. So they show up before first light. Now watch this. Matthew 28:1. Look in your Bible at Matthew 28, verse 1. How many of your Bibles say after the Sabbath, meaning singular? Raise your hand if your Bible says Sabbath, singular. 28, verse 1. Sabbath, singular, Sabbath, singular, singular, singular. Anybody have plural? In the Greek, the word for Sabbath here is actually plural. And yet no English translation translates it as plural because it doesn't make sense. What do you mean plural? There's only one Sabbath a week. They forget about the special Sabbath. If you translate it into English as the Greek actually says, it would read like this. After the Sabbaths, plural, meaning two. Do you see that? Isn't that cool? Matthew 28, verse 1. But nobody translates it that way because nobody recognizes that there's 2 Sabbaths in a row. A special Sabbath, sundown Thursday, the regular weekly Sabbath, sundown Friday. 2 Sabbaths. That's why the women had to wait till first light on Sunday to get there. But he's already raised from the dead. What's counted off? Look at the circle there. Sign of Jonah. Jesus said, I'm going to give you one sign to prove who I am. I'm going to give you the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Where was he, by the way? Where did he go? Hades, right? He went to Hades, the good side or the bad side? The good side, the bosom of Abraham. That's where Jesus went for 3 days, the heart of the earth. All right, 3 days and 3 nights. Days first. If he died on Thursday, he's in the tomb part of the day Thursday, right? But that counts as one. He's in the tomb Friday day. He's in the tomb Saturday day. He's already out of the tomb before first light on Sunday, so we don't count Sunday day. There's your 3 days. 3 nights. Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. By the way, it doesn't matter if you're on the Jewish calendar or on the Julian calendar. It works both ways. There's your 3 days and 3 nights. Crucified on Thursday. In John 2, 19 through 21, it says this. That's in that oval, the second line item in that oval. It says, Jesus said, remember, destroy this temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. If I told you something was in 3 days, when would it be? Today's Wednesday. If I told you in 3 days, I'll give you $20. What day? Saturday. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Jesus said, destroy this temple and I will raise it in 3 days. He's destroyed on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. In 3 days. Every timing passage in Scripture in the Gospels fits this narrative perfectly, by the way. Have many people come to the same conclusion over the centuries in the Christian church? Yes, they actually have. There's a lot of people, many people who have come to the same conclusion that Jesus was crucified on a Thursday, not on a Friday. And that we should actually be celebrating Good Thursday instead of Good Friday. Does it matter? When he took the bread and drank the cup, what did he say? Do this in remembrance of me. So I think the most important thing we should remember This is so cool. I love this. This is amazing to me. It's scripture just, it solidifies to me that I can trust this book in so many different ways. But in the end, we remember this week for what he did. And the most important thing that happened on that week is that he rose from the dead. We know that happened on Sunday, on first fruits, the first day of the week after the Sabbath. Because without the resurrection of the dead, without the resurrection of Christ, there is no Christianity. That is the central truth to all of us, because Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if the dead had not been raised, then Christ has not been raised. Your faith is futile. You are still dead in your trespasses and sins. There's no Christianity. And that I know happened on Sunday, on the first day of the week. Amen? Well, I also know he was crucified on Thursday, because it says so right here in my chart. Right? 3 days and 3 nights. Yeah. Okay, so that was back in Leviticus 23. The question is, why is there 2 Sabbaths? So Leviticus 23, we said, okay, when you slaughter the lamb on the 14th, the next day on the 15th of Nisan is the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and you are to hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. Okay, so Leviticus specifically spells out in the instructions for this feast, right, of the Passover and unleavened bread, for the Passover and unleavened bread and first fruits, they're all kind of combined here, that on the 15th of Nisan is a day where you do no regular work. That's a special Sabbath, straight from Leviticus 23. Okay. Yeah, Sabbath, the pattern of the Sabbath is do no regular work. So that is the special Sabbath. It's kind of like a special holiday. It's the only way I can explain it is the instruction for the Passover came way back in Exodus and Leviticus. Now, when God gave the instructions about the Passover and about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, God knew what was going to happen hundreds of years later, right? But it just so happened that in 32 AD, the special Sabbath of the Passover, which can happen any day of the week, just so happened to be on a Thursday with the regular Sabbath starting on Friday night, right? It just so happened. Like there's such a thing as coincidence, right? But they were back to back in 32 AD. Special Sabbath and the regular Sabbath. So that's why I have those 2 boxes there. Well, yeah, it would happen every handful of years. How many times does your birthday land on a Saturday? About once every 7 years, I don't know, or 10 years, I don't know. With leap year, I don't exactly know that stat. So, but your birthday falls on a different day every year, right? Christmas falls on a different day every year. So the Passover meal, Nisan 15th, falls on a different day every year, just like a Christmas or your birthday or whatever. That's why they're back to back. And it just so happens they were back to back in 32 AD. Is that cool or what? I don't think most churches know this is exactly right. Look, how many people do you know in your life? I started late, so give me just like 2 minutes here. And I hate doing that, by the way. I apologize. How many people in your life do you know that go to church on Christmas and Easter and that's about it? Yeah. Because those are somehow special Christian days, right? Does the Bible say that you're supposed to elevate Christmas and Easter as some kind of religious special days? No, there isn't actually a word about it. Right? But we, in our religiosity, want to make them kind of religious special days, and so we do. I contend, like Paul does in Romans 14, that some think that some days are special, other thinks all days are the same. I think Paul fell in this camp where all days are the same. I fall in this camp of where all days are the same. I want to live my life as if every day was Christmas, as if every day was Easter. I want to live. Remember, Jesus said to the woman of the well, he says, there's a time coming and has now come when you will worship God, not up in the temple and the mountain with all the religiosity, but in spirit and in truth. Those are the kinds of worshipers. So look, I love this, but there's no special requirement by God to go to church on Easter, you guys, or even Good Friday, or Christmas, or any other day. Do you see what I'm saying? Let's set the religiosity aside and worship in spirit and in truth. All right? So this is powerful to me, but I'm not going to march into Troy's office. You want to go? You can go. Here, you want a couple extra charts? You can. I think it's a fun thing. But when you're sitting in church on Good Friday, let's remember that he was the perfect Lamb of God, whatever day that was. Amen. Lord, thank you for this incredible timeline. I just hope it sinks in and fills our heart with just this amazement that you told us about these feasts hundreds and hundreds of years ago to Israel, and then Jesus happens to fulfill them perfectly, exactly, and that he's on the cross at the exact moment that all of Israel is sacrificing their lambs. It gives me holy goosebumps. I thank you for these truths. Lord, may these truths and our understanding grow our faith and knowledge of you, and just to help us fix our eyes on you that much more. We pray in your name. Amen. Thank you all. Cool class.
So a timeline where people think that he was crucified on Wednesday
I have.
and then rose on Saturday. And that's what I was thinking when you said that. And that's what I think that's kind of an exciting thought, though, given that the Sabbath.
Yeah, but we
is-
know there's one simple reason. We know he resurrected on the first day of the week. The feast of first fruits is always the first day of the week after the Sabbath. And that's the day that he rose on. And Corinthians tells us that Christ is our first fruits. So we know I'm going to lock in the Palm Sunday, and I'm going to lock in that he rose on a Sunday, on the Sunday.
Okay.
Right? And
I'm
now I count back 3 days and 3 nights, and that's when I get to Thursday. So yeah, I've read a lot of people that claim that it's Wednesday, and I don't get their arguments don't make sense to me.
I
They
love what
really
you said, and I haven't really followed it. I just like the thing about the Sabbath being the Sabbath, like that's the day that God made that day for me, right? So
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Like then it is also the day that Christ is risen, and then we could observe that day, which has whatever. But
it fits. It just
right.
the
But
whole
I love what you're saying, and I'm it's like what do you do with the passages that are in Matthew and Mark and John that say that that Jesus is eating the Passover dinner, that they're going to eat Passover?
Well, that's what I mentioned when it says go and prepare the Passover in the upper room. Then you'll go into the city and you'll find a man and he'll show you the room and it's all ready. They were going to eat the Passover in that room, but it doesn't say that they were eating the Passover. It says that will be the room in which they were going to prepare to eat the Passover. So this is the Last Supper is the preparation day.
Right.
Okay. And they would have been preparing that room, and that evening they had to eat. So they ate bread and wine, right? In preparation for the next night when they would eat the Passover and eat lamb, right? Lamb would be the main course at the Passover meal. So all those passages that say they go and to eat the Passover and so on. One, Jesus did celebrate the Passover for 3 years of his public ministry, but not in this final year. It never says anywhere in all the different descriptions on the chart that it never says that he is eating the Passover. And remember, I even brought up the verse, Jesus desired to eat this Passover, but says he will not eat it again until the kingdom comes. So he's basically saying, so remember, most say, see, he's eating the Passover. No, it doesn't say that. That verse, I actually think makes more sense if you picture him on the Last Supper saying, I desire to eat this Passover with you tomorrow night,
Right.
but I'm not going to eat it with you again until I come in my kingdom. You see that?
Yeah.
So
No, I do.
many use that particular verse to say, see, he's eating the Passover.
Right.
I would argue that passage really doesn't make a lot of sense if he said that while they're eating the Passover. I think it makes a lot more sense if the Passover is the next night.
I agree. I mean, I know he's the Passover lamb. I know that he was killed. I know that.
I
And
mean,
I know
that's
that he was
symbolism
killed at
is
the same
obvious.
time that the lambs were killed. And John, Lamb of God, or John, I know, I agree. I'm on board. I just was confused. Like, what do you do with those? So thank you.
And though I didn't put down every verse on this chart,
Right.
there's many of them here, and all the ones that have very significant time references are I think I've got them all on this chart. So they're all in there. So if you want to go through and check each one and read them,
Yeah,
and
I will, and I love this whole conversation. And I do think on the first Passover though in Egypt that they killed the lamb on the same day they ate it. But that's neither here nor there.
yeah, it's still, they slaughtered the lamb at twilight.
Right.
Then they go into their house that evening.
Right.
They're eating it so that the day would have changed from the 14th. The day changes at sundown. I know it because you have to remember.
Yeah, okay, then it makes sense. We're saying the same thing.
It's the same
It's the same day, like how we
in
think
our
of the
calendar,
day.
but because the day changes at sundown,
right.
it's actually the next day for the Jew.
Okay, thank you. So
You're welcome.
I forgot that. That
Yeah.
confused me. Okay, so yeah, we are saying the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, on ours, if you look at it, if they sacrificed the lamb on Thursday afternoon, they ate the Passover meal on Thursday evening.
They ate it here, right? Because like in Egypt, they had to. They killed it
Yeah,
and
so
they
here.
ate it that night.
Lamb slaughtered
Right.
right here, lamb eaten right here.
Right.
See that? Lamb slaughtered, Passover meal eaten.
So it's
So
the
it's-
next day for these guys, but
Right.
the same for us.
It's still Thursday on our calendar, but the day changed from the 14th and the 15th between the slaughtering of the lamb and the eating of the lamb.
Right. Okay.
It moved from Nisan the 14th to Nisan the 15th. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Did that help?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. You're welcome.
You turned that off, right?
Yeah, not yet. I need to turn it off here. All right, stop share. Thank you all. Mute everyone. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Oh, you're welcome, guys. I love this teaching, by the way. So you guys have a blessed week. I will see you, or actually I don't see you, but I can see some of your faces here, but I'll talk to you next week. How do I end the meeting here? All right, end the Zoom meeting, end meeting for all. Be blessed.